I probably won't do Jillian and Angela justice with my introduction, but they're with MITRE, and they have a strategic foresight session, as was mentioned. And it's an exercise, it's an opportunity to do something a little bit different than we've done in the past. I think we've typically done keynote presentations, so hopefully this is a welcome change, and the exercise is fruitful. It is an exercise, hopefully will engage everyone. It's very interactive. And it's a chance to focus on innovation inside and outside the medical device industry, and it's a chance for us to look beyond just our company focus and look at the industry as a whole. It's meant to be collaborative, so it won't focus on your individual company. It'll be more of a collective industry. And the exercise is to help companies be prepared to talk about and address future changes as an industry, and talk about maybe environmental, technological, societal changes, social changes, socioeconomic effects of our industry, or to our industry. So hopefully we can gather input. Please find me and give MDIC any feedback you have, either directly after the summit or the forum, or email me, because I'd really like to know how this goes, if you found it valuable, what maybe you would do differently to get more value for not only us as an industry, but an individual company's perspective too. So with that, I'll give it to Angela and Jillian, and we'll engage. Thank you.
Thanks, Alan. And thank you, MDIC, for allowing us this time to do something new and different with your participants. So this is an interactive activity, so if there's anyone sitting back in the stadium seating, if you guys could eventually just move forward to one of the tables. We would like about 5 to 6 people per table. You don't need to take your stuff with you, but that's kind of how we would like to do the exercise. All right, so I'm going to give a brief overview of strategic foresight and its value for organizations, then I'll hand it off to my colleague, Jillian Humphreys. She'll actually review the directions and how to do the exercise, and that will actually take up the majority of today's time. So strategic foresight, right? This is different from strategic planning, which strategic planning is usually about 3 to 5 years out and focuses on one or a couple of objectives for your company. So for example, one objective would be, we want to increase revenue by X amount of dollars in the next 5 years. That is a single objective, and it happens within your company. Strategic foresight is more about looking into the future. We're talking 10 to 25 years. All right, anything shorter than that is already in motion, and anything further out usually is, we can't really predict, and we won't know what's going on. So it's really hard to determine what that'll look like. So again, strategic foresight is about the exploration of multiple futures. So it's about your organization, yes, in your field, but how does that exist in the healthcare industry? And then even larger, how does it exist in the world? And what is going on in the world that will impact your industry, as well as your company, as well as healthcare? So that's really what strategic foresight is about. And it's not about predicting the future. We're not trying to predict it, but more about anticipating possible or probable futures. So I'm going to give you guys a couple of examples where companies have used strategic foresight, mainly in the 50s and 60s, so this does date back pretty far. The first one is the U.S. Coast Guard. They used strategic foresight, and it actually became very well used in their decision-making processes, and it ended up being called Project Evergreen, which is still in effect today. The second, probably most famous example is Royal Dutch Shell. So I'm going to talk about them just a little bit more. During their development of alternative futures, they went through this very, very thoroughly. They were able to forecast future needs and the growing demand of oil. They recognized that geopolitical developments could cause oil disruptions, and it actually did. So OPEC, which is the Organization of Petroleum Exporting Countries, occurred during the late 60s, and it led to a serious disruption in oil supply. However, Royal Dutch Shell, they were prepared for the oil embargo, which actually happened in 1973, and they survived the oil embargo. And they actually recovered with greater speed than their industry peers. So now imagine if other companies took the same approach. So I'm going to give you 2 more examples of companies who did not take this approach: Kodak and Blockbuster. These companies did not prepare for the future. Blockbuster actually went out of business. But before they went out of business, they had a really good hold on the movie industry. Is there anybody in this room who does not know who Blockbuster is? Right. Okay. So we can pretty much, that shows that they had very high brand awareness, right? Everybody knows who Blockbuster is. So they had the movie industry in the palm of their hand. Imagine if they looked into the future and saw that we would no longer go to a store to pick out a movie or on VHS or CD, but rather you could stream it or get it directly on your TV. They could have been Netflix, right? That's the possibility. That's what we're looking at. So my second example is Kodak, right? They ended up declaring bankruptcy. They totally changed their business model in reaction to the market and everything that was going around them. They laid off countless workers, and they probably had a slew of very angry shareholders, as I know I would be. However, Kodak had instant photography capture pretty much down pat with Polaroid and their invention of the Polaroid camera. Imagine if they had been able to look into the future and realize all the digital platforms that we have today. They could have been Instagram, and a much different look on how their shareholders view them. So based on these couple of examples, strategic foresight should be used by organizations to test organizational resilience and determine intended or unintended consequences of major decisions. So I'm going to wrap up quickly here with just a possible scenario to get you all thinking about the future state, especially of the medical device and how it could interact with the community around you. So you and a significant other decide to conceive or adopt a child. I think this can relate to many of us. Upon your guardianship of that child, a microscopic robot or implant is placed inside that child. So whenever an illness begins, before he or she even feels any symptoms, it sends an alert to you and your physician team using a medical device. With the help of automation and algorithms, a doctor prescribes a genome-based drug therapy concocted specifically for that child's biology. Within 90 minutes, this medication is sent to you by a delivery drone. Okay, and I'm going to keep going. So then you have another drone that delivers another medical device to administer the drug and monitor the effectiveness of the treatment real time. This device is also able to release additional dosages based on their child's recovery and the response to the drug. How many people think that this scenario is possible in the future? Raise your hand. Right. Good. All right, so hands down. How many people think that this would benefit our society? Hands up. All right, keep those hands up. All right, how many people thought of everything that could go wrong as you're, right? All right, this is good, this is good. So this is how I want you all to use your brain to think about these future scenarios as we go through this exercise. So now I'm going to hand it off to Jillian.
So before we actually, sorry, short people problem. Before we launch into the exercise, I'm going to talk academically a little bit about how strategic foresight works in practice before we dive in. So like Angela said, this is a methodology. It's a methodology for systematically considering a longer time horizon and a broader scope of issues than other forms of strategic planning you may be accustomed to. So it's a method for facilitating the development and achievement of long-term goals. It's an approach that was developed in the 1950s as a means for the U.S. to contemplate outcomes from the Cold War. So it was developed by Herman Kahn, and he, along with Pierre Wack, who was the former head of Royal Dutch Shell, are considered the founding fathers of this particular approach to strategic planning. It's the baseline from which foresight evolved. So foresight itself is couched in this rich history of scenario planning and game theory, which are both tested and proven approaches and enable decision makers to anticipate the impact of future trends on their strategies and their policies. So it's basically a tool in your toolkit to help with both risk management and strategic planning. You can think of it as either risk analysis or strategic planning on steroids. Why is this important and what does this mean for you all? If you look back at the history of strategic planning, you might find that executives and leaders have a really hard time thinking past the next year or even 2 years in a planning cycle. there's this ingoing expectation that when you plan for the future is going to look a lot like it does today. This creates a huge gap in your planning and performance. So strategic foresight actually helps you fill this gap. And rather than focus on planning for the present, foresight helps you plan for the future by planning for difference. As Angela said, those alternative futures we're going to be exploring with the activity we're about to do. So rather than looking at what citizens and consumers need today, you're looking at what citizens and consumers might need tomorrow. And in this industry, MDIC and the medical device industry, you want to be able to link your innovation and your product development to changes that might occur in society and nature. So 2 examples, in addition to the lens that Angela provided. If you think about gender identity, there are going to be more people who engage with the industry in different ways based on the ways in which they identify. So physiologically, they might be male or female, but they might identify based as gender fluid or gender queer, etc. So what does this mean for the products and services that you develop? And from a marketing perspective, how might you engage that population, as opposed to me, who's a cisgender female? And a more timelier example, WHO just officially declared a pandemic. So what's the global impact of a pandemic? So if we look at these recent events and the impact of COVID-19 on global society and economics, we see this in a huge disruption to healthcare, causing a paradigm shift both socially and economically. Large numbers of communities have been forced into quarantine, New Rochelle being the most recent example. We've seen the stock market go on a roller coaster ride, and there's been shortages in medical devices, both due to panic buying and the impact of the virus abroad, impacting manufacturing. However, this disruption is not the first time we've seen this. We've seen previous outbreaks of novel viruses. So if strategic foresight methods had been used previously, the signals emanating from out over the horizon, coupled with these other outbreaks we've seen previously, may have helped the industry plan for the possibility of a new pandemic, building resiliency into the production of medical devices and influencing the way we do business differently. Strategic foresight in this way provides an opportunity to connect. It links innovation with sustained business operation, and being informed of the larger trends and potential disruptions helps you think about what opportunities exist while staying ahead of potential threats. So seeing these signals and being able to take action allows you to pivot, helping to potentially lower the rate of business failure. So we're about to embark on an interactive exercise, which will require your full engagement. So we'd ask that you put your phones down and your laptops away before we begin. Also, since we have a smaller group than we anticipated, if y'all could also consolidate across the tables, that would also be helpful. Yeah, with 5 to 6 people per table. For those of you in the stadium seats, if you could please come down as well. Okay. All right. Okay. All right. So at each table, you will find the following items: a printout of a pyramid and a set of cards, and also sticky notes and pens. On each card is an identified trend that may have specific implications for respective industries and or broader societal implications from a healthcare perspective. Working in groups, we'd like you to collaborate and determine how these trends may create disruption. Is it an opportunity to innovate and collaborate, or is it a potential threat? And at what level of the pyramid this disruption may take place. You'll see that there's various levels of disruption on the pyramid, and their definitions are also listed. First things first is we'd like you to divide up the cards equally across all the participants at the table and then read through the trend cards you have in your hand. After that, we'd like you to conduct a quick sort of the cards based on your gut reaction to the trends that you have in your hand. So just sort them on the pyramid against the level of disruption you believe that they're going to have. Once all the cards are sorted, then in your group, we'd like you to have those critical discussions about why you place the cards where you place them. And then if the cards need to be moved, you can move them. If you think they need to go higher up the pyramid because it's going to have more of a paradigm shift, move it up the pyramid. If it's more of a business model impact, move it down towards the business model. Please note that they can cross, trends may cross levels of disruption. So you may have a trend that rides the line between business model and medical device industry. Also, these trends are not trendy in that they are like Pantone's color of the year. They are actually based on things we are seeing happening both in society today that are trending towards becoming things that could happen in the future. Also, if you see a trend that is missing during your discussions and you go, hey, we're seeing this as a potential outcome, please note it on one of the sticky notes on your table. All we ask is that when you note it, just write the level of disruption as well, and also what organization you're representing before you stick it on the pyramid. So real quick, we'll walk you all through an example. So if Angela and I are in a group together and we're having a discussion, and I select aging population as my trend card, and I read it, and it says, by 2020, so this year, is the first time in human history that people aged 65 and older will outnumber children under 5. And by 2050, this proportion will be nearly 2 to 1. And say I'm in the industry where I create pacemakers. This is going to be pretty impactful for me, potentially. And I might put it on the pyramid under medical device industry. Whereas Angela works in an industry where she makes pregnancy kits, pregnancy test kits. And she might not necessarily see a direct tie to her industry. However, if we are seeing an impending silver tsunami, she might find that this could potentially impact her company's business model. And so she might be thinking of other ways in which her test kits could have applicability. So maybe instead of making pregnancy test kits in the future, she's maybe making menopause test kits or prostate cancer test kits or other test kits that could have an appeal for the population that this is going to be affecting. And so that would be an example of how this might work. And so this card may end up riding the line between medical device industry and business model after we have that discussion. And so that is how this exercise will work. If you guys have any specific questions, we'll be floating around. There will also be some facilitators at your tables to help you. You can also have a discard pile if you believe that the cards have zero application to your industry or to healthcare service delivery writ large. All right.
Let's get started.
Let's get started.
Hey, everyone. Sorry to interrupt the wonderful discussion. So it is 9:40, and we have a break scheduled from 9:50 to 10 o'clock. So in the next 10 minutes, if you guys can wrap up your discussions, we will, after break, we will take the next 30 minutes to report out. So in your report out, think about what you place, what cards you placed at the top, what cards you placed at the bottom, and what story you want to tell to the rest of the group. And also, please pull out your top 3 trends to look for in the next 10 to 25 years. Thank you.
everyone. It's 9:50, so we have a 10-minute break. Feel free to take that 10-minute break if you'd like. Otherwise, you can keep working.
Hold on. All right, everyone, let's get settled back into our tables. All right, so we have about the next 30 minutes to have a discussion. So we'll start by going from table to table. And again, you're reporting out on, one, what you think is going to be a healthcare paradigmic shift, and then, again, kind of telling a story of what you think is at the bottom of your pyramid. And then we're also going to report out on our top 3 trends to look out for the future. So how I envision this, I really want this to be a discussion for the next 30 minutes, so I'll go around table to table. If you guys can kind of talk for 2 to 3 minutes on how you went about placing things on the pyramid, and also let me know if there's anything in the discard pile as well. And we'll just start, we can start here at the top front. We can start here. And then after the table presents, we'll go on to have a discussion about it. And you guys feel free to chat, and then we'll go table to table.
Okay, awesome. So I guess starting with the big paradigm shifts and what we put down for that set of activities, and it actually does touch on one of the ones that we selected as the big 3, but I'll get to those afterwards. I think overall, some of the big ones that came out was the idea of the universal basic income. You know, that's a big shift in terms of, you know, how healthcare can be delivered, what costs are associated with that. The AI initiative and the American AI initiative in particular, how does that play? How does that shift the dynamic within the healthcare, not even just the delivery portions of it, but even just the production and other pieces of that. Big corporate monopolies, you know, because everybody seems to be buying everybody else out. That's a big impact to the healthcare system, right? The idea of what does that mean? What does that do for competition? I like the Uberization of goods and services. I think it's ever more clear, especially as I even see my daughters and what they expect and what they do things. And if there isn't an app for it, they don't really like it. So that's going to be something I think that is probably going to be more endemic as we keep moving forward. And it should probably easily translate into the med device space. And if it doesn't, it'll probably be demanded at some point in time. Water insecurity. I think that's going to be a big one to focus on and worry about as we move forward. I think the gender and sexual identity looks like it was also one that came out, the high paradigm shift. Social media influenced manufacturing, right? Even just the devices and what's going on, letting the community kind of have a voice and demand on that thing. And then using geolocation to create digital influence. So I think that was another one. When we talk about the big paradigm shifts, that's where we saw big disruptors that could impact, I think, the whole healthcare system as a whole. And, you know, if I am missing the mark on anything, please feel free to add. From the bottom of the pyramid, I think things that we saw looking like they could influence the idea of a social credit score. I think that one, if people have that same one, it's intended and listed as something that's going on right now from an individual perspective in China, but it's not so far that maybe people wouldn't demand it here to understand from a company standpoint, right? What's their credit standing per se from their social impact moving forward. AI and human touch, you know, finding that balance between the two. Most of that, I think, is generally big trends at the bottom were centered around really that more individualized consumer engagement, how the technology engages with the consumer. Let's see, digital skills gaps, skilled technical workforce, those are things that are going to impact the companies individually. I like the blockchain activity, and we'll talk a little bit more about that a little later, but that's something that also has some opportunity or potential from impacting company product services, how they deliver, what visibility people have within that space. Okay, our big 3. this one is one of the ones I think that factors into the healthcare paradigm shift, social models of medicine, right? As other countries have the adapted social models, some of the states here have adopted something very similar. That's one I think that will change the whole landscape and what's demanded within the healthcare. Where's Adrian? Ecosystem. She's not in the room. I know. Apparently we're developing an FDA drinking game around that. There was one in terms of, blocking these things out together, but I think this is a big trend. There are four that kind of clustered in similar or related constructs and concepts. The idea of the aging population, changing world demographics, smaller households, and personalized medicine. These are all things that start to link together and could be a big factor in the way healthcare is delivered or people are expecting to be able to deliver things. Going back again to the idea of even watching my daughters and how they interact, most of the time it's online, engaged. They don't necessarily want to be out engaged or talking to people, so they might want the expectation of things that are a little bit more personalized and delivered to them. And the last one, or the last cluster, was focused around trust. Trusting in government and trusting the strangers, right? That democratic voice on things, and how do people have more confidence in not just what is being promoted or the social influence it's providing, especially if we're talking in the med device space. But I think the other one, which was a big one, was the idea of trusting government, right? If things are going downhill, if people are feeling like we're not able to deliver, how do we change that paradigm shift? And does that then change the expectations of the public on us and how we have to engage? So I think those are the three criteria, right?
Yes.
Okay.
Thank you, Cisco. And just to point out one thing that Cisco's team did is he and his team actually started identifying what we call patterns. So the last two trends that he identified were actually groups of trends, and in strategic foresight parlance, we call those patterns, because they're how the trends are starting to come together to tell a story of the future of, in this case, medical device industry. Thank you.
Way to go, Cisco. This is not going to be like that, just so you know. Disagree with everything he just said. No, that's not true. Hi, my name is Beleda. No, just kidding. All right. Okay, we followed our homework as best we could. We actually identified themes from what's most important to, or what's most impactful to what we'll say least impactful from a overall society perspective. So I believe it's a pattern, but right now we'll call them themes until you tell me that they're actually interlinked. So the three themes that we have at the top are around all of the biometric, the nanotechnology, the dust, all of that stuff that will probably be inside of a person or remote and microscopic at some point. So that was one theme. The second theme was around the global economy, and then the third theme was around events in our climate, resources, changing needs that way. From a low, I don't want to say low risk, from a lower impact perspective, we really had two themes, and those themes were around the automation and technology and transportation specifically, and then around your workforce, your people, skills. What else was in there? Technical workforce, aging workforce, so all the people demographic type thing. That's here, we're already starting to make concessions for it, make changes for it, and seeing it unfold before us. And if we had to then pick one that we think we should focus on and really start to embrace, because it is the way that was coming at us, it's this whole theme and pattern around all of the nanotechnologies and the biometrics. That's it?
Yes. Yes, we did identify patterns. Do you have a name? Do you have a name for your patterns? Like if you could pick pick a name for the pattern, say for your nanotechnology? Sure, that's fine.
Okay, for our team is actually very similar to yours. So we have the three main, like what we're considering our paradigm shifts. The first one is the environmental, biodiversity, climate change, but then we've linked it to other influences like if climate change would impact the food that we're able to grow, then our population would be more unhealthy. So it kind of like links down through our pyramid. The next one here is advanced AI, smart dust, the technologies, which the team over here had already spoken about. And then we've linked it to other things further down in our pyramid, like biometric ID chips, which are more tied with healthcare and the device itself. And then our last one here is with the trust in government, social media, and who's actually influencing our people, our citizens, and the social credit score and data privacy. So essentially, where it links to our medical device industry is the citizens no longer really have that choice of what data is shared because it's communicated all of the time. So, and we don't have control over who uses that data. So is it the medical device company? Is it the insurance company? Is it the government? So like you said, it's a little scary. So having some controls in that is going to be that paradigm shift in how that data is managed. Any other comments from the team?
All right. So for the first three groups, you guys did definitely have some commonalities. Did anybody have anything in their discard pile? We got told that we couldn't discard it. Yeah. So, before we move on, and I just want us to talk about if you guys had anything, I know we tried to have you guys place everything. So as we wrap up, if you did have anything in the discard pile, go ahead and pull it aside, and after everybody presents, we'll talk about some of those. Huh? Yeah. Okay. Okay. Fair enough.
Hi. So at our table, we also identified some of the themes that other people have talked about. And we kind of selected three that stood out for us from, let's say, top to bottom. And on the top one, it's everything that relates to healthcare costs and availability of healthcare to patients, universal income, or also universal healthcare. So we see that as a possible opportunity and threat to the whole healthcare system. The other theme, somewhat in the middle, influencing the availability of resources, is related to biodiversity. Also climate change, availability of resources, water, raw materials, and things that we may need to manufacture our devices. And then toward more the company or the product is the workforce and the changing technical skills and needs that we have for that workforce. And also that may create relationship difficulties, between generations, the older generation versus the newer generation as we go along. What else? Anything else?
Anything you discarded?
No, but we had a hard time placing cryptocurrency. And we were like, and so I think in the end, we placed it towards business model. Because if somebody wants to pay with cryptocurrency, then okay, all right, we'll take it. But we won't say no, but all right, today is maybe not an opportunity.
So we followed some of the same themes that the other tables have also identified. Our first major theme that traced through all of the levels was really technological. So the combination of artificial intelligence along with nanotechnology, smart stuff, and then how that traces through into trust and information. So deep fake, social media influence, and that cascades down into data interactions. So faster and wider data availability at the middle tier for how that influences personalized medicine, manufacturing practices, and then one more level down, how technology influences individuals and companies, and finally at the bottom level with skills-related items. So remote work, experiential learning, technical skills gap, and then data privacy. The other two themes we had were primarily environmental, so climate change, water, and the like. And then the third category was sort of governmental influence, so trust in government, universal basic income, and social models of medicine. So those were really our three overarching themes. I did want to touch on cryptocurrency and blockchain, though. We looked at that as, so cryptocurrency is another way to pay. Business can adapt to that pretty readily, sort of like adding in PayPal. But the new one is with blockchain, also looking at that as an opportunity for additional collaboration. So it gives two entities the ability to protect their data and interact with each other in a new way. So sort of like we talked about this week with collaboration, is this another way to break down a barrier? So we kept that at the business model level. I think that was one thing a little different from the other tables.
Anything that you discarded?
No, we put everything on there.
Great. Cool.
Hello, everyone. My name is Elijah Coriel. I'm with the CMI Institute. It's my first time being at one of these forums, so looking forward to meeting many of you. For our table, I think we picked up on a lot of the same themes and organizations that the other tables did, and we came up with a name to explain and understand our patterns, which is the basket theme, right? Because this all interconnects with each other. Our first one thing I think we did a little bit differently in terms of our specific cards that we placed at the top of the pyramid, we, I think, constrained ourselves. We thought a lot of them could have fit in there, but we really wanted to bring it down to what are really the top that we think are going to hit at that high level. And the ones we chose for that were climate change, changing world demographics, and water insecurity. We thought that of the very many cards on here, these are the ones that perhaps we're going to require the biggest sort of paradigm shift or response from the medical community overall. And then at the bottom of the pyramid, we had more tactical skills-based related cards, such as digital skills gaps, transportation technology, curriculums for data science and privacy, and things of that sort. In terms of the top trends that we identified or buckets that we put these into, we looked at technology, in particular how technology is driving the push towards a more personalized approach to medicine. So things fit in there like artificial intelligence, biometric technology, things that allow us to deliver new kinds of value in a different sort of delivery mechanism, which we found largely enabled by technological development. The other bucket or trend that we identified was along the lines of demographics. So this is changing world populations, different geographies, different distribution of ages along the human population, household size changing. These are all things that demographically we'll have to address. And then the third trend we had, sort of a catch-all bucket for external forces, right? There's things that are happening across the world that we have less control over than we'd like to admit, but we nevertheless have to react to. So in that bucket, we put climate change, so water insecurity, things like pandemics, topics of that sort. That's how we approached it. Anything to add?
I thought I'd put in a pitch for genomics since I work for a genomics company, and we are making a big push towards personalized medicine using genomic technologies. So that went along with what Elijah just described as personalized medicine from the technology pattern.
Is there anything that you all discarded?
We did. We discarded social credit scores largely because I don't think we could agree what to do with it. So we just kind of rejected it outright.
Fair. One more question for the group. Did anyone identify a new trend?
Genomics.
Oh, genomics. Okay. Other than genomics?
For us, the social credit score, we put it at the top because we thought it would be a disruptor in the way people have access to healthcare, and how it would rank people, you know, in worthiness. So that is true. We thought, so yeah, we would put it at the top.
Yeah, it had been originally, we did the initial placement and then we reevaluated all of them as a group. So it had been initially placed higher up, but then as a group we couldn't figure out how this would translate out beyond China, how it might impact global economics or the US specifically, where most of us are located and have a lot of our work. So that's why it ended up getting removed.
So I don't, it might have been represented and I might not have read it properly, but I'm not sure that I saw medical hacks. So that trend that we have, I don't know if you are brave enough to search that on the internet, but people who are self-treating. So, and they're using 3D printers and whatnot. So complete self-care by medical hacking, basically.
If you could, would you write that down for us?
Sure.
As a trend to and then place it on the pyramid where you think it might go?
Sure.
Great, thank you.
So we didn't really discuss this, but there is a trend towards alternative medicine. And, you know, when I was attending one of the AdvaMed conferences, you know, the gentleman that was the founder, I believe, of Medtronic actually stood up and talked about a brand of Hawaiian medicine. And there's also others like homeopathy, and there's things like, you know, the naturopathy, which are starting to take root. And so just from a pattern perspective, those are things that are kind of happening around us. We haven't integrated them into the rubric of what we call allopathy, which is our traditional westernized medicine. But I think that's something you got to think about in the longer term.
I think the other trend that we see is the rapid re-engineering of technology in outside of U.S. or in less regulated markets where technology is being essentially copied and put on the market, but not necessarily going through any sort of rigorous, you know, clinical trial or data evidentiary to vet that out.
Any other new trends to watch? Any final thoughts from the group? Great.
So yeah, I have a couple. So there's a couple trends that I wanted to talk about with the group. So I noticed there's one, I think it came up Cisco at his table, with big corporate monopolies, but I didn't hear it anywhere else. So I kind of wanted to get everyone else's thoughts on this topic. Okay.
Campaigns. Sorry, thanks. Big corporate monopolies went with social media disinformation campaigns, trust in government,
Okay.
and data privacy policies.
Okay,
sort
so
of
that
that
was kind of a theme.
Formed a group underneath the social credit score,
Okay.
sort of as a threat model.
Anybody else want to respond to this one? All right, and I have one more. So there was another one, and I think we had talk about it here at the back table where Kendra's sitting. Using geolocation to create digital influence. Kind of want to know where people placed this one and if they thought that this one made a difference. Nothing? Okay.
Yeah, so I think from a consumer perspective, I don't think it's at healthcare yet, but specific to some businesses, I know there's triaging as you use Google Maps and the like to select a certain type of business. I know that businesses are paying for those ads. So I don't know that it's hit healthcare, but I could see, some of the providers in this area triaging. You type in heart care, you type in heart attack. This hospital has the best outcomes, so go to MedStar versus XYZ hospital. So I could see it going that way, but I don't know that it's quite hit yet.
Okay.
So I think from our standpoint, we had also put that up as one of the, things that could possibly be more disruptive across the whole healthcare paradigm shift, simply because of that same potential. You're seeing it everywhere else. I mean, they figured out how to do it even just with regards to advertising and marketing through Facebook, general target ads through elections. It's something that's potentially a avenue down the road, but it's, to your point, it hasn't hit healthcare yet, but it's got potential to do it. We had this up to
Does anybody have any final thoughts? I could keep going, of course, but we are at time. Does anybody have any final thoughts that they would like to share? Anybody have any major disagreements? I think we have some really interesting trends here. If anybody doesn't have anything else? No? All right, well, thank you guys all for your time and your participation. Oh, you have a more? Yeah. Yeah.
So I love this exercise, but now what do you do with this?
This is a great question.
Something I need to worry about, because I worry about a lot enough already. I don't want to worry about all this stuff too, and some of it's icky and scary. So what do you do with this next?
So there's many things you can do with this information next. You guys all identified your top 3 trends to watch. So what we might are going to do with this information is we're going to take pictures of all of your hard work and send it to you in a report. Typically, the next step you would take with this is to start developing your patterns. Those patterns help you tell a story about the future of the medical device industry and the healthcare industry. And then once you've done that exercise, you start taking a more nuanced approach to your strategic planning. There are several steps that you go through in strategic foresight after you've done your pattern development. You can create a list of patterns, those initial stories that you want to tell that start to map out what those alternative futures look like. And then once you have those alternative futures all mapped out, you can start to prioritize those futures based on what you think is most important, either to your industry or to healthcare service delivery writ large. And then once you have those prioritized, you can start to map them to create scenarios. And scenarios in this case are those immersive stories you tell about the alternative futures. It's almost like a short science fiction story to help you understand what life in the world might be like 10, 20 years from now. And we've done this with the Census Bureau, and we've done this with the IRS. Those 2 examples of customers we've done this work with. And they found it very helpful in helping them to plan and prepare for alternative futures, and also to understand what to monitor going forward. and also to fill gaps in their current strategic plan. So as they move forward, going into their next planning cycle, they can review the scenarios that have been written for them, see what they need to plan for, and then it helps them build that business resiliency. And so that's basically the process. So the next step in this would be to really start working on those patterns.
So, I agree that this was a really useful exercise in terms of pushing us to think in ways that we don't typically think, to anticipate issues that we don't typically anticipate. I want to offer for your response a position so that you can tell me what I'm missing. Why is my hypothesis inaccurate? And what I would say is, we as a group are here to learn about and strengthen the impact of the case for quality. And the exercise that we just completed, while very, as I said, very interesting and worthwhile, is just too disconnected. And the people sitting here, people on the phone, et cetera, don't have the bandwidth, in some cases, certainly for me, don't have the authority to anticipate these kinds of long-term factors. And so while I think that what you're talking about is useful and interesting, I also don't think that it's germane to the immediate work that we need to do.
Well, I think just, and maybe Alan, correct me if I'm wrong, but I think part of the thinking, especially when this was discussed and brought up with Joe, the idea was, okay, here's a mechanism to start planning some of these things out, but there is work that needs to be done by the steering committee in order to create a strategic plan for the next upcoming cycles, of which it will be directing the case for quality efforts towards the right focus areas. Some of these may be way out in the future, but some of these may be something that we need to target and bring much closer in from a effort standpoint. And I think that's what he had mentioned or envisioned, but again, correct me if I'm wrong.
I'm just going to even give one more, slightly more personal example. So for us as an industry partner, we rely on water, right? Our company. I am reeling through all the different scenarios that can happen when and if all of our whole climate type of activities come to fruition. Wouldn't it be prudent for us to put in all of our VIP actions as we go forward? How do we move toward that 25-year out future state? What am I going to do for water when water goes away, right? So we have to think about that now, and that should actually be part of our plan, because there's no regulation that says we need to do that, but boy, wouldn't it be prudent for us to stay in business? So that's how I'm making that connection to this future state one.
I'm the last one? Okay. No, I would say that, you know, even near term, in terms of some of the activities within FDA, case for quality, et cetera, artificial intelligence is one, you know, because we're starting to come out with, I don't want to call them devices, diagnostic tools that are constantly learning, rapidly changing, and there is no real, like, it's not like you submit it and then have change control. It's changing all the time. It's learning through artificial intelligence. And how do we get those things on the market? How do we support them? How do we make sure that we're doing so in an appropriate way? I think those are near-term challenges that